evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Mahoning Drive-In Theater, the largest single-screen drive-in in the United States. We're certainly glad you could be with us this evening, and don't forget the concession stand is open with all kinds of great things to eat and drink.
Welcome to another episode of Mahoning Drive-In Radio. This is Mark here, General Manager at the Mahoning Drive-In Theater in Lehighton, Pennsylvania, coming to you with another episode. This time I am talking with our old friend, Thom Shubilla.
Hey.
Author of PRIMETIME 1966 to 1967, the full spectrum of television's first all-color season, a very exciting book that we had you on talking about a while ago when we were doing our Batman show and our Monkeys event. Which I will say we are going to do again in 2024. Fantastic. So we may talk to you a bit more about that. And you have an upcoming book that I'm very, very excited about because you're writing about all the things I love most in life. James Bond and the 60s spy craze coming in 2024.
Correct. Yes. So that is coming around the bend. The final touches are being put on that book. And so I'm looking forward to that. And I'm looking forward to talking to you about that more. And definitely when you have your James Bond weekend or spy weekend or whatever we're going to do next season, I absolutely can't wait.
I really do hope we do more Bond films because I'm a huge fan. And, you know, a certain number of those films I've never had a chance to see on the big screen because I wasn't alive when they came out and played on the big screen. And they don't really get played that much in my lifetime. There haven't been too many opportunities until relatively recently to see those films on film on the big screen. And I brought you here today to issue you a summons. No, we'll do that. You know, I brought you here today to talk about Universal Monster Mash 7, which we have coming up on October 27th.
I can't believe it's 7, by the way.
7, I know. It's like so many of our events. So many people come to us in these shows late. Like they come in, and people say, you know, how come you're showing a certain movie again? It's because, first of all, in a lot of these ongoing series, there are only so many movies to choose from, but also so many people come in, you know, at installment 3, installment 5. Some people will make their first time be Universal Monster Mash 7. So we'd like to give everybody a shot at these movies. And the films we are going to be screening and we're going to be talking about today are as follows. On Friday night, we have The Invisible Man, Creature from the Black Lagoon, and The Raven, 1935 version. And on Saturday, we have Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman, The Mummy's Ghost, and The Mad Ghoul, which is, I think, the one film from this weekend I've never seen. So anyway, I brought you on because I've been told by many you are a big Universal Monster fan, as am I.
Yeah, huge Universal Monster fan. Something that I have written about in several publications, Monster Bash magazine, Scream magazine. Also, I may be giving it away, the subject of, partially, the subject of a upcoming book.
Ooh.
So don't want to really give away what the whole premise is yet, but certainly the lion's share of the book is Universal Monsters. So
is it a book about films in which people carry torches in anger?
Films in which monsters pick up women.
Hey lady, your shoes are really nice, or
physically pick them up. No, one time no, that's not the book. But the Monster Bash convention, which is the classic horror movie convention in Pittsburgh area. One year, a guy, I was working the one not desk, but the merch booth, and a guy said, "I'm looking for movies where monsters pick up a girl." I said, "Oh, okay. I think we could do that." And so I'm looking through these books. Okay, I think a girl is picked up in this movie. And I go, that's a strangely specific request.
So your knowledge of films in which monsters hoist women has led you to Scholarly Home. That's fantastic. You see, they say we were wasting our lives watching this stuff as kids. that specific bit of knowledge will lead to an ISBN number.
Exactly. So no, but yeah. Again, I really don't want to give it away, but again, the lion's share of that book will be classic Universal horrors and something that very recently I've been diving headfirst into in terms of research. So
Oh, that's great.
So it's
Well,
fresh.
any excuse
It's
to
fresh.
keep having you on. Like we haven't talked about, I don't think we've talked since you did this, but we ran
No.
a Santo movie at the drive-in. We did this
Mm.
show, Real Rumble, that we've done every year. And we always do like live wrestling and then a wrestling themed movie. Unfortunately, rain killed the wrestling portion, the live wrestling portion, but we still ran a Santo movie and you came and sat with me. And I wish I'd had it
Yes.
recorded because you just laid down the Santo knowledge and it was a heck of a good time.
Yeah, so definitely next year, if we show a Santo movie, I'd love to do the podcast for that.
Absolutely. So let's dig in. So our first film that we're going to be showing on Friday, Shocktober, as I like to call it, 27th, as part of Universal Monster Mash 7, is The Invisible Man, which is celebrating. This is crazy when you think about this. This is a 90th anniversary screening of this film. And you think about something that's 100 years old in terms of any kind of entertainment, and you would think it would be so creaky and vododiodo that it wouldn't appeal to anybody anymore. And these films 1,000% still work. When we do these Universal
absolutely.
Monster Mash shows, we literally have ages like 8 to 80 come out, and they all love this stuff. So, as the song goes, Claude Rains was the Invisible Man. Invisible Man 19. When did you first see this movie? Do you have any recollection of that?
Definitely when Universal re-released everything on VHS. So it must have been mid-90s.
Mm-hmm.
Must have been. I was probably in middle school, somewhere in there, mid-90s. Yeah. That was definitely my first recollection of The Invisible Man. And it may have been something I saw on television quite before that. But The Invisible Man, if you do think about it, it was really that third movie in Universal's arsenal. We had Dracula in 1931. We had Frankenstein 1931. Again, that was the third movie. That was what they had come out with to continue their monster run, and I don't think they could have done a better job with it.
It's so good, and you think monster and you think gnarly creature. This is just a man driven mad by an invention and the power that gave him. And it's funny when you think of Universal Monsters that he's one of the few that's just a guy. Like, he's not a creature in any way. He's a guy with a superpower, really.
Right. And superpower. And again, the effects for the time, really cool. And, again, a guy driven for madness, not for necessarily even power. Like, he just wanted to terrorize. He wanted to derail trains and things like that, which is he doesn't really have a goal. He doesn't have an end game, which is kind of crazy.
He just wants to be a pain to everybody.
Yes.
And the voice performance, because it's a lot of it is just Claude Rains' voice. I remember as a kid thinking it was scary just on how he delivered those lines. And of course, how he comes in when you first see him, he's all bundled up with those weird goggles. It has this weird alien-like look to him. And the voice. And what's her name? Una? I can never remember her name.
Yes. I forget as well, but yeah, Una.
Her, the old woman who is and I say old woman, she's probably like 32 when they shot the movie. But the woman who is the shopkeeper does just the most fantastic, over the top, scared proprietress in this film. And
she is also in Bride of Frankenstein,
right? And
she's in a couple. She's in a couple of those films. She always played the same character as well. But you're right. She probably was about 30. That seemed to be what happened in a lot of these movies.
It's so funny. People just carried themselves. I used to look at like my parents' yearbooks when I was a kid and like, they all look so old and they're 16. It was just people were more mature and carried themselves in a different way in those.
There are people in not even that. There are people in shows in the 80s where it was like they were 34. When Frasier debuted on Cheers, he was 29.
What?
Yes, he was 29.
Wow.
But anyway, The Invisible Man, and they also, I think they did a really great job of explaining, not necessarily the science of it. I don't understand how he made himself invisible, but they did a really great job of, if he's in the city, soot would stick to him. Things like that, which I thought was kind of interesting. And the one thing, have you ever seen the Invisible Man TV shows, the British TV show? No,
I've always wanted to. I've always never.
It's a really cool show. And he's a good guy in the film. He's not, driven to madness or anything. But in the show, they make mention, and I think they do pretty much every episode, is that he invented invisible clothes as well.
So he's not running around naked.
So he's not naked, which I think is really great.
You don't always think about that. And it really wasn't until Amazon Women on the Moon. And there's that segment with Ed Begley Jr. as a man who thinks he's invisible and he's really not. And he's just getting naked and moving things around to scare people. Really, really well done. But it wasn't until then I'm like, yeah, that part where he's out in the snow and leaving footprints, he's naked in the snow.
Yes.
Yeah, there have been so many adaptations. I mean, we had that recent Elizabeth Moss adaptation of The Invisible Man, and you had Hollow Man. You had I remember The Invisible Woman was a TV pilot that failed, that was shot on videotape, and NBC ran it, Denver in it. And there was a Japanese, I haven't watched them, but I know Arrow Video put out a double feature of, I think it was 1950s or 60s Japanese Invisible Man films.
The Human Vapor.
There was that. These were
that
called
one?
The Invisible Man.
Okay.
I can't remember. I've not watched them, but I have them. And it's interesting that it hasn't been done as much as some of the other iconic Universal monsters, like say a take on Frankenstein, a take on Dracula. But every so often it does it. And I thought that recent one really was great because it did something different. It wasn't just sort of the same story all over again.
And they made it, and it was also a horror movie. And I think that was one of the big mistakes that Universal made with when they tried to make the Van Helsing movies, when they tried to make Dracula again. They tried to make it into a action film.
Yeah, that was a thing for a while. It seemed like, is that horror and action were blurring a bit much. And so often you would see sequences in a horror film that were meant to be, exciting in quotes, but they were really kind of action scenes. And like, there's nothing scary about stuff blowing up, really, unless you're in the middle of it.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, The Invisible Man, I think I first saw this, there was a New Hampshire public television station that for a while ran a string of Universal monster movies, and I caught those that way. They were like Sunday nights or something like that. And I just remember thinking it was really creepy. It was at an age where, back in my day, when I was a youth,
in my day,
you saw so much old stuff on TV, and now old stuff was 40 years ago, so that's the equivalent of 80s stuff now. But back in the 80s, there was so much on TV that if you were not totally close-minded to it, you could take in stuff from the 30s and the 40s and the 50s and all that. And for me, it was just entertainment. And monsters were cool. So I've always enjoyed that. Well, we've just been joined, late breaking news, we've just been joined by Jeff.
Hey.
Oh, what it is.
What it was.
Yeah.
What it shall be.
Yes.
So we're just going through the movies that we are going to be showing during Universal Monster Mash and just giving our opinions, or if we know any information about it. Do you have any memories or strong opinions on The Invisible Man with Claude Rains?
Oh boy, I just love the effect that the special effects had was what they were able to do back then. I mean, it came across, I thought, really well, and yet, they didn't have near the stuff that they have today to be able to do that kind of thing. I just thought the way they did it was just genius.
It still impresses me when you watch it. I mean, you can sort of see the seams here and there, but how they figured that out, like, I don't know if that effect had been done before this movie somewhere and they just applied it to this, or if they had to come up from the ground up on how to do that.
I know, it's amazing.
Like I said, definitely a really cool effect, and I don't believe I've ever seen an invisible effect in a movie prior to 1933.
And there were how many in this series? I think we've shown most of the sequels.
There's Invisible Man, Invisible Man Returns, Invisible Woman, which doesn't really have a connection to The Invisible Man.
Yeah.
More of a in-name only sequel. And then there was Invisible Agent. And that was a cool movie.
I thought that was fun. We ran that, I think, last year.
Invisible Agent. Oh, that's right. Yeah, you did run Invisible Agent. Where again, it was a war effort film. It was a film where they're going to send the Invisible Man behind enemy lines and kind of disrupt Nazis and steal a secret formula. And then after that, the Invisible Man's Revenge as well. And then, also Abbott and Costello meet the Invisible Man.
Oh, yeah. I always forget about those as being, and a lot of them are technically part of the canon, I think, or at least
yes.
Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein is.
Yeah, Invisible Man Returns, Invisible Agent are definitely canon. I'm not sure about Revenge. I think it is. Yeah, it's the same. Yeah, it's the same guy from Invisible Agent. But Abbott and Costello Meet the Invisible Man is more in tune with Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein.
Yeah.
Because it is teased at the end. But I wanted to say about Invisible Agent, and the one thing that I always love about Invisible Agent, or I've always found fascinating about it, is that it's one of maybe the only Universal horror film that deals with World War II. You know, when you're looking at Frankenstein meets the Wolfman, I think they're in Germany.
Aren't they supposed to be set in older times? Although I know Larry
sometimes
Talbot
there's a car, and sometimes like Frankenstein, there's a modern car. Definitely, Talbot is wearing 1940s clothes.
Yeah.
So there's kind of a vague era of when it's supposed to be, and definitely like Dracula is supposed to be 1930s London. I don't know, but it's the only one that deals with the war. It deals with anything like that, which is kind of an anomaly. It like I said, Frankenstein meets the Wolfman. It seems like they're in Germany to me. Nothing's going on.
It's a fantasy Germany, bereft of Hitler.
Yeah. I love it.
An idealized Germany of the time.
Yes.
So the third movie we have on Friday night is one of my favorites. We dip into the 50s now, from 1954. It's Creature from the Black Lagoon, which originally was released in polarized 3D. That's not the red and blue. Don't get me started on 3D. And now everybody assumes the red and the blue was the way it was always done. It wasn't. It was two projectors, one for the left eye, one for the right eye, polarized glasses, and it worked really, really well. Creature from the Black Lagoon is the first in what was a series of 3 films. Am I not mistaken? Revenge of the Creature, Creature Walks Among Us, all of which we've run at these shows in the past. This is one I loved as a kid because it was a monster, and it was a scary monster. And that music is that is so evocative. And I can remember watching this on Creature Double Feature on Channel 56 out of Boston as a kid in the afternoon, and just loving it and thinking he was so scary. And he's an aquatic creature, but he'll chase you onto land. He'll get in your tent. He'll hop on your boat. There's no escape. He'll climb a tree for you. They never showed it, but you knew he would do it. He survives fire and those effects where he's like looking into approaching the camera and breathing, and you can see the gills moving in the mouth like a fish out of water. What knowledge do you have on Creature from the Black Lagoon?
So I'm glad you brought up the soundtrack. The soundtrack is absolutely phenomenal. It's by a guy, Hans J. Salter. And he also did another movie that you showed this summer, The Incredible Shrinking Man. Was another, but he had a epic career of making soundtracks for films, and the music also used in another film that you showed this summer, King Kong versus Godzilla.
Yes.
So has that same library soundtrack, which I think is really cool.
That's something I remember as a kid too, was watching those Godzilla movies again on that Creature Double Feature show. And years later, when I hadn't watched these movies for a while, I remember going, that piece of music was from Godzilla movies, right? And then I would watch Creature from the Black Lagoon, and I'm like, wait a minute, that's the same piece of music from the Godzilla movies. It's in Creature from. What's going on here?
Yeah, it's definitely you have to, if you paid attention, and obviously we are people that obsessed over this type of thing. You noticed it for the Creature from the Black Lagoon, and the Creature was really the last hurrah of monster movies for Universal. What I would guess the end of the golden era, I guess you could say, and it was after the quote unquote classic monsters had ended their run. So Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein had already come out. Abbott and Costello Meet the Invisible Man had already come out. Abbott and Costello Meet the Mummy. So all those movies which effectively ended those series were finished. And this was kind of the last hurrah, and definitely the segue into the atomic era of films.
This was before Tarantula and all that other stuff?
Right. As soon as the Tarantula was, I think, 57. So Tarantula, Monolithic Monsters,
which is a great movie, especially when considering it's a movie about rocks growing really tall and falling over, which is really mostly what it is. It's a really good film about rocks growing really tall and falling over.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I really love that film.
It's I had seen trailers for it on some like Zacherle's Horrible Horrors or one of those videotapes from Good Times Home Video, and thinking, what is this about? And I finally saw it, and when I realized what it's about, I laughed. But then I kept watching it. Like, this is actually really cool and suspenseful and well done.
Yeah, that's actually a movie. Every so often, I will watch a horror movie with my father, and every so often he'll say, I want to watch the Monolithic Monsters. Okay, we can watch the Monolithic Monsters. There we go. But yeah, The Creature. And then those films came out in a 3-year span. And actually, if I'm not mistaken, I believe I saw Revenge of the Creature first.
That was one that made the rounds in 1983, 84, when 3D TV was all the craze. And the stations got packages of these 3D movies.
Yes.
And Revenge of the Creature was one of them. So I saw it initially that way. And I also remember my local library playing it for kids, like in the kid room one weekend on 16 millimeter in 3D. So I've seen that.
Well, that's a great introduction to that film.
It was pretty great. Yeah.
But yeah, I definitely think that was the segue into, again, that atomic age, but it was still a physical monster. It was something human size, unlike, again, tarantula and things like that. But, kind of gone where full moon, spider webs, fog, castles, that sort of thing. And also started breaking completely free of literature and folklore. If you think about Dracula obviously based on Bram Stoker's book, Frankenstein, Mary Shelley, Mummy, somewhat based on superstition and lore, and definitely a film that, we'll talk about it, but definitely a film that was based on the craze at the time from King Tut. Wolfman, again, based on lore. So all those films, H.G. Wells wrote The Invisible Man. All those films were based on something else. Were based on lore. Were based on a book. And Creature was one of the first, entirely original series.
And it is one that if you can see it in 3D, there are if you go to places that show film prints, they're going to show the red blue print, which works so. It's an old print.
It works in giving me a headache.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not a fan of the red blue. It really only works for still images and things that aren't full color. But if you could see it in polarized 3D, if you see a place that will show it digitally in 3D, or if you have a 3D set up at home, it is really, really good 3D. And I mean, not all of it is coming at you style. There's the underwater sequences where Julie Adams is swimming and the creature is mirroring her under the water, which is a beautiful sequence anyway. You can see the depth underwater and all of the fish and all that stuff. It's really cool and worth checking out. Part of that 3D wave, which was only really lasted about a year in the 50s, and Universal, hopped in with that in Incredible Shrinking Man. So we talked about the sequel, Revenge of the Creature. There's The Creature Walks Among Us, which is the creature basically turned into Frankenstein's monster, where it's the creature made so that his gills are removed and he has to walk on land. And it's pretty sad. It's him just trying to,
it's
trying to live his life.
It's definitely a film that you feel terrible for the creature. And I don't like that they constantly made him out to be a really bad guy, which he's not. He's the guy that they took him out of the Amazon.
Exactly. He's trying to live his life in the Amazon. These interlopers come in, start setting off charges underwater, start taking his fish away, and he's just like, "Could you please get off my lawn?" Essentially, is what we're talking about.
But the Revenge of the Creature was probably the first one I saw and my favorite. Because it's set in that marine land or whatever. Right. I always thought that was really cool.
And the creature was played by two different men. Yep. On land, it was Ben Chapman, and on Under the Sea was Rico Browning, who we lost not that long ago, and I was able to meet at a convention years ago. And he was an interesting guy anyway. Rico Browning lived in Florida and just worked on anything aquatic in TV or film. So stories that man had about working on Flipper and Sea Hunt and all the Ivan Tors shows and Thunderball. I was about to say,
I wrote all about him for James Bond and the 60s spy craze. I had the opportunity to meet both of them, actually. I had met Ben Chapman, and Rico Browning. Again, both really great guys. However, Ben Chapman was always really salty about who really was the Gill Man. He believed I am the Gill Man, not the other guy.
He technically did more acting, I guess.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
And Rico did swimming.
Yep.
Jeff, do you have any fond memories or thoughts on the Creature films?
No, the one I know best was the first one. I think I've seen the others once or twice, but the first one I've seen several times. And no, the idea of the underwater creature and was something I had never really seen before in that respect. And a teenager, I thought Julie looked fantastic in the swimsuit, but everybody thinks that. I really enjoyed the first one immensely. Yeah.
It's funny. It's a story I tell a lot in various contexts, but one of the first DVDs I ever bought was the Universal initial release of Creature from the Black Lagoon on DVD. And we went to a place that was like a Laserdisc store, and this was just when DVDs were first coming out. And my friends and I went there, and they had having a big sale, and we bought them. And then we went to a Bickford's for breakfast after that, and we had our purchases that we were looking at on the table. And this guy older than me by like a decade or two sees what we have, and he picks up, which I thought was very forward. He picks up off my pile the Creature from the Black Lagoon, and he goes, "Creature from the Black Lagoon on DVD? I wouldn't pay $1 for that." And he went back. And I remember being so offended. And then I realized he's probably a guy who grew up in that era and thought this was just a garbage movie. And I've caught myself a few times where I see things that people younger than me are really into that I think aren't very good. And I remember that guy at Bickford's in my Creature from the Black Lagoon DVD. I take a few steps back.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's all when you see it. My father used to talk about when I was a kid, I was into the AIP movies because that's what was on TV and reruns all the time. And at one point he was saying to me, I was probably like 8 or something, back when I was a kid, American International was the worst. If you saw that logo, you knew it was going to be terrible. And I was like, if I see that logo, I know it's going to be great.
Oh, it's going to be a great movie.
Exactly.
I had talked about this when you showed the Santo movie.
Yeah.
And I have a friend that grew up in Mexico at the time, had grown up going to see Santo movies and had seen Santo wrestle and things like that. And the one time, I think maybe the first time I had met his wife, and he said, "Tell her what type of movies you like." And I said, I like Mexican wrestling films. And she like with the guys with the mask. I said, "Yeah, those films are terrible. Like those came on TV, and they were awful. What's wrong with you?"
I like fun.
Yes.
Right. About so many of these movies that we show at the theater and the kind of that we're talking about and that I like, they show me something I've never seen before. And if you're as film hungry as we are, after a while, you keep seeing the same thing over and over again. But a guy in a wrestling mask fighting a werewolf, I'd never seen that before. And that was excellent to me.
Oh, and I'll wager you never see it again either.
If we base it on attendance, you're right.
Yeah.
It was raining.
It was raining, yeah.
Yeah, you gotta give them a chance sometimes.
As I sit here, literally am looking at the Santo DVD collection to my left as we're recording this. So the final film we have on Friday night at Universal Monster Mash 7 is one that I don't remember if I've seen. This is the 1935 Edgar Allan Poe adaptation, The Raven, with Bela Lugosi and Boris Karloff. Do you know anything about that one, Tom?
I can't wait to hear him do this one because I've got this on 16 millimeter.
Ooh.
Oh, cool. Yeah. And this was definitely, one of the first with both Karloff and Lugosi. They had the Raven, the Black Cat, which I think the Black Cat is definitely my favorite out of the bunch, and the Invisible Ray. And one of the things that I've always been, again, what we talked about with the Creature from the Black Lagoon, where it was taken from literature, the Raven, obviously the Edgar Allan Poe story. Right. It says, I think, something like, the movie is suggested by Edgar Allan Poe.
Mhm.
What does that mean? It has nothing to do with the Raven. There's no Raven that says nevermore. There's nobody rapping at my door. There's
Suggested is
no.
what you say when you don't use anything from the source
I
material.
don't think that there's a character named Lenore.
Yeah, I don't remember. I know I've seen this.
I don't think there is.
I don't know that there's a heck of a lot more in this to do with the Raven than there is in the Corman AIP Raven.
Oh, that's true too.
Got a little bit more, but that's really it's a movie about two wizards. That's got nothing to do with what the original story was.
Yeah.
I don't know if you could make a feature out of that. I guess you could. I don't know if anybody's tried. There was another film called The Raven that had John Cusack in it, if I'm not mistaken, and that was like a murder mystery. But again, it really didn't have much to do with the story.
Yeah, that's true too. But again, it's just one where they took as much as they could with that, using that name, kind of the Edgar Allan Poe, I guess, trilogy of things. So,
do you recall what this one's about? Because I really don't.
He was a neurosurgeon. He has tortures people, stuff like that. Lugosi's the surgeon, and then Karloff, I think he escapes from prison or an asylum or something like that. And he kind of becomes his henchman.
Lugosi tricks Karloff into working for him, saying that I can change your face. I can operate on your face so that nobody will recognize you. He said, right. I just need you to do this for me. Well, he talks him into doing this deed for him, which for some reason I can't quite recall, but he tricks him. Instead of changing his face into a totally different, he just makes him ugly. He just makes him makes him ugly. It's good. I like it. Like I said, I have it on 16 millimeter. Probably watched it the last time about a year ago. And, I always liked that one. And then at the end of the movie, they start getting into the pit and the pendulum stuff.
Oh, interesting. They just start picking
in his torture chamber. He's got.
Oh, yeah, that's right. That's the one, the pit and the pendulum. That's
Yeah, at the end of the movie, they're in his torture chamber. He's got the pit and the pendulum and a couple of other torture devices, and actually get somebody on the table and start that thing swinging. Click, click, click. Pretty good.
Much like when we ran The Black Cat a year or two ago, which was a lot of people the night we ran that said that was the movie they were most excited to see because they love it and nobody ever plays it. That's what we try to do with these Universal Monster Mash shows is we hit the anniversaries, we hit the fan favorites, but always slip one in that is lesser screened. And we're very lucky that Universal has so many of these on 35. I was talking with Mike Drumbor, one of our assistant projectionists, and he was saying that Universal had a big vault fire many years ago that wiped out all of their prints, all of their, distributed prints. And they had to use the insurance money to replace they couldn't take the insurance money and build another, roller coaster. They had to take it and replace film prints, and they chose to have prints struck of things they didn't have before the fire. So like there might not have been a print of the Black Cat and the Raven for decades or more, and now they did it. So a lot of what we get are these new strikes that are only 10, 20 years old maybe, or however long ago the fire was. And when they hit our screen, you'd swear they were digital, which is nothing against 35. They're just so flawless that you're like, is this a film print I'm seeing? There's nothing that's betraying the fact that there's anything wrong here. So when you see this copy of The Raven, I'm going to guess it's going to look probably like it did in 1935 on our screen.
Wow. That's incredible. I know that a couple years ago you had, maybe it was Dracula or something like that. And I remember thinking, wow, this is a really cool print of this. Like, maybe it was The Invisible Man, actually, a couple of years ago. So,
well, I'll tell you what, they must have restruck just about everything, because everything from Universal Monsters that I remember coming in the last couple of years is in excellent condition. So it must be they must be all a part of that restrike, which is fantastic.
And it's a way that, like I say at our place, it really peels back the layers of time and lets you just kind of jump back in time to what it was like seeing these movies when they were brand new. And our screen, it's a CinemaScope screen, but originally it wasn't. The CinemaScope wings were added in the early 50s, probably right around the time of Creature from the Black Lagoon, actually. And if you look just right, you can see where the original, 4:3 Academy ratio square was. And so this weekend is a weekend where we're only using, the original footprint of the screen for a presentation, really. So it's kind of a fun throwback.
It's a lot of fun. It's great. And just seeing the movies again on our large screen is it's fantastic. It's just great to see.
and they're very quiet films overall. I mean, they have musical scores, but there are many stretches, especially in the early ones, that are very, very quiet. And that lends itself, or the atmosphere of our theater works really well with that. If you're sitting outside or with the windows down in your car and it's a quiet night, we're kind of in the middle of nowhere. So as long as there isn't, the racetrack isn't running or a plane isn't flying over,
Yeah.
or a cow isn't, expressing itself, it just draws you into that movie even more, especially if there's like a full moon out or some clouds. It really, like this weekend we had, some horror movies here and there, and the sky just adds to the atmosphere, especially if it's a werewolf.
Yeah.
You get a full moon during werewolf. It's pretty special. Saturday,
that would be great.
We have the 80th anniversary. Again, these numbers are crazy. The 80th anniversary screening of Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman from 1943, and Tom is literally rubbing his hands in anticipation. You can't see it, but I can, to dive into this one.
So again, not to give too much away, but Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman is the inspiration for, again, my yet to be named, yet to be pitched, yet to be completed book. Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman, is really the first time that you saw two monsters from two separate franchises meet, which is really big step forward. And now we kind of take this for granted. We have the Marvel universe and things like that, the DC universe, and before that, Freddy versus Jason, that type of thing, and movies like Monster Squad that we grew up with. But this is the first. This is like the first time that kind of two universes have combined, kind of creating this shared universal universe. And with the film, number one, it's Lugosi's first and really only time playing Frankenstein's monster. And at the end of Ghost of Frankenstein, he does become the Frankenstein's monster. He's Igor, and Igor, he tricked Lionel Atwell into putting his brain, so Igor's brain, into the Frankenstein monster's body. And so this is the first time that he gets to play the Frankenstein's monster in an entire film. Now, famously, he had rejected the role in 1931. I found quite a bit of reports from the time saying that there's test footage of him in the Frankenstein's makeup, again, from 1931. But, there were a number of scenarios of why he rejected the role. He didn't like the makeup. He didn't like the dialogue. He wanted to focus on Murders in the Rue Morgue, which was coming out, and he was set to star in even before Dracula was released. So this is the first time. So he did kind of an about face and agreed to play the monster. The only problem is, number one, the monster was established at the end of Ghost of Frankenstein that the monster was blind. So throughout the movie, he walks around like he's blind.
Mm-hmm.
The only problem is they cut out all his dialogue because it was established in Bride of Frankenstein that the monster could talk, and Igor as the monster could talk. So they cut out his dialogue and all references to him being blind. So Lugosi kind of looks like he's just fumbling around, like there's something wrong with him, like he's too old to play the part even.
But those outstretched arms became part of
that became what it was. Yeah, that became
the
when we think of
impression.
Frankenstein's monster, that's what it is. When you see kind of a silhouette of all the monsters, it's Frankenstein with the outstretched arms, which is I think it's kind of cool that that's what we think of Frankenstein now. So you have somebody say, if you tell somebody imitate the Frankenstein's monster, that's what they do.
And I believe from previous, especially more, it's easier to detect on the big screen if you see it with us. There are sequences, maybe long shots, where you can see Lugosi's mouth moving, and they had taken the dialogue out. And I believe of certain moments in the film where it is clearly not Lugosi in that makeup, like a stuntman or a stand-in or something like that.
Yeah, I think in a couple of fight scenes, it's definitely not him. And that's certainly something that you see really throughout Lugosi's career, is any time that there's any kind of physicality. And I never really read anything about that. It's he's out, At the end of Ed Wood's Bride of the Monster. There's a couple scenes where it's clearly not Lugosi, and he doesn't have makeup on.
Yeah, this was one that I remember seeing on TV as a kid. And also, can't talk about Universal Monsters being the age I am, at least, and not mention the Crestwood House books.
Yes.
Oh, why those have never been reprinted. It's got to be a rights thing.
Those were 1,000%. If there was library time in my library, I went right for those.
Do we know, were those ever sold to the public? Because I only know people talking about getting them out of libraries.
No, I don't know anybody who had them outside of, I think now you could probably buy them, but I've never seen somebody like an old edition. I've never seen a new edition, and I've never heard of somebody saying growing up, oh, I bought it. My parents bought it for me. I was always in the library. I think my go-tos were always, this one. No, it definitely wasn't a Crest. We had a King Kong one, I remember, and I remember a Sherlock Holmes, but I don't think that was Crest.
They had these orange covers, these orange and black and white sepia covers.
Oh, Creature! There was a Creature one too.
There was a Deadly Mantis I remember checking out.
Oh yeah,
and my library, they didn't have all of them, and what they were, these oversized, like 8.5 by 11-ish hardcover books that for kids that condensed the story of these Universal Monster movies with a lot of black and white photos and easy to read text. And they were a lot of people's introduction to Universal horror. If you were a 70s or 80s kid or beyond, if their library still had them, if they weren't stolen by probably somebody older who really wanted them. I can't imagine many libraries still have these on the shelves anymore. And I actually have one a friend bought me from eBay. And of course, it's a library discard. I think it was The Mummy or one of the Mummy films. And they were just a way to sort of, again, in that pre-home video era, these movies were on TV. They weren't really re-released that often. You'd catch them on TV if you could, and any other way you could re-experience them, whether it was an album of the dialogue or these picture books or the books that reprinted the scripts or bubblegum cards or comic books or whatever, you really latched onto that. And those Crestwood House books are still highly sought after. You would think for a generation, that's some sweet money not being made by Universal or somebody and not just reprinting those as they were, because I know I would pay a decent amount to have a full set of those, because it was one of those things you could never own. It was your library. Unless you were a thief, you could never own it.
I can't imagine. I don't know why the Catholic grade school that I went to, they went, we're going to buy these books. I don't know what they were thinking.
So second feature on Saturday night is The Mummy's Ghost from 1944. Now, do we know which number this was in the Mummy series?
That was number 4. So the Mummy.
Oh.
So, then the one with Tom Tyler, then the second one with the Mummy's hand, and then, so this is number 4. So it's the second time Chaney played the Mummy.
Now, is this the one that has one of my favorite lines from any Universal Monster film, where it's set in the bayou? Is this that one? It's like
yes, this is the one. Okay. Yes,
and a guy, I don't know if he's supposed to be a farmer or a helper or whatever, but I believe the line is, "The mummy's loose and he's dancing with the devil." It always cracks me up. It's a Dudley Dickerson kind of guy saying that. So this is when I saw probably the last time, and the first time and last time I saw it was part of that Universal Legacy Edition DVDs that came out, where they packaged all of the movies from each of the series together. And I want to say we may actually have a reel of this film at the drive-in. I think we have 1 or 2 reels of one of the Universal Mummy movies, but sadly it's not the whole movie. So
you know what? That's the Mummy's Curse. You're thinking of the Mummy's Curse.
Oh, okay.
That has that. But at the end of, and not to give anything away, at the end of the Mummy's Ghost, the mummy is captured by quicksand, but then somehow wakes up. It's in Massachusetts. The mummy's in Massachusetts, and then somehow wakes up in Louisiana.
Well, you see, the quicksand tides. They run underground, and they've all dried up now. As they used to exist everywhere, apparently. If you watch old movies, there was quicksand left, right, and center. But the quicksand, tube did run from somewhere around Saugus, Massachusetts, into the bayou.
I once wrote an entire article about quicksand in classic horror films, and it became a minor obsession with me. And of all these times that you would see quicksand, and I always felt as an adult it would be something that I would have to deal with more.
As a kid, I was like, this is something I have to watch out for. I'm practicing my technique on how to escape from quicksand, and it was all for nothing.
Yeah, it's terrible.
Or was it?
If you run into it, I'll be.
Who will be laughing then? It'll be me until I'm gurgling on quicksand. Anyway.
But yeah, at the end of House of Frankenstein, there's quicksand. At the end of, in what's that Hammer film? In Hound of Baskerville, From Hell It Came. There's a quite a bit of quicksand in classic horror films. So I'm here for all of it.
So yeah, I always liked the Mummy films. Logic comes into play where it's like, well run. But other than that, it just this lumbering, unstoppable, dead presence was always really cool, and the makeup effects were always really cool. And it's funny when you think about the original Mummy, which is not really what we're talking about, but when you watch the original Mummy film, there's not a lot of Mummy in that movie. There is some, but it's a lot of Karloff as that prune-faced guy.
Yeah, and then a lot of close-ups. The close-ups, which they recycle in quite a few of these. The close-ups of Karloff in the Mummy makeup.
Right. I mean, the original is a great movie, great atmosphere. It wasn't until the later ones where they really amped up the Mummy quotient of the films.
Definitely the Mummy's hand is the one where they tried to make it almost like a comedy. It was with the two kind of comedic characters, and then
they would with that.
Then they switched over to Chaney Jr. And his was more of a mask. Like his wasn't necessarily a makeup. His Mummy take, which I always thought was a different take on things.
Yeah. They're fun. They're and this is again 1944, so we're like well into World War II, but not referencing it as you pointed out.
Nope.
In this film.
Yeah, no reference to that. The people are in Mummy's Ghost are in college, so I'm sure they have draft deferments.
Everybody was a conscientious objector in the Mummy's Ghost.
Yes.
Yeah.
So yeah, Jeff, do you have any memories of the Mummy films? Like as a kid, did they creep you out? Did you see them on TV back then?
I saw the first one. I may have seen the others. I don't remember them that well, but I remember the first one the best with Karloff as, like you said, prune face, because I can't think of his name either now. But I thought that was really good. You're right. Not a lot of Mummy in the first one, but I liked the story, and it was just creepy by itself. Even though the Mummy was not in it that much, it was just kind of creepy, as I remember. The first one is just really good, I think.
It is one of those too. It's very quiet. It's it's early in the Universal where there was still you watch, what was it, Dracula, I think, and so many sections of that movie just don't really have dialogue or much going on sound wise, and those work so well on our lot when it's a nice quiet cool night with a little breeze blowing. It just adds to the atmosphere of seeing these things. The final film on Saturday night of our Universal show is one that I don't think I've ever seen, and this is another 80th anniversary screening. This is The Mad Ghoul. Have any of you seen The Mad Ghoul?
I have seen The Mad Ghoul, and again, that's another movie where I definitely saw it kind of mid-90s when Universal re-released the lion's share of those things on VHS finally, and it's Evelyn Ankers and George Zucco are in that, and again it's a cool movie, and nothing, I have cool makeup, cool deep eye makeup on the Mad Ghoul, but again really nothing that I would call of note in the Mad Ghoul.
It's one for the hardcores, as I like to say.
Yeah.
Where we program these things.
Yes.
It's the kind of programming I love, where you put the stuff up front that, the most people are going to like, and you reward the people who stay to the end with something that's really rarely screened or hard to see or just plain weird. And
yeah,
I think
this is the weird
Raven,
one.
Yeah, the Raven and the Mad Ghoul, we've got that going on, because again, those are the two I most want to see. Not that I don't love the others, because this is like a really solid lineup, but those are the ones I don't know very well. And I easily, I've never seen those on the big screen. I would be hard pressed to say how many times the Mad Ghoul has screened anywhere since 1943, unless someplace was doing a really serious long-term retrospective of Universal.
Yeah.
And really, really grateful that Universal has a print of this for us to run. And again, can't imagine it's played very much since they made it.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I don't think so. I don't think I've seen that one either. I think so.
The one thing that, again, in my research on a number of these movies, there was supposed to be a movie made called Chamber of Horrors. And it was, I think Variety had announced it. And it was supposed to be starring Lugosi, Karloff, Chaney, Peter Lorre, Claude Rains, and George Zucco.
Wow.
And it was supposed to have the
wow.
Invisible Man and the Mad Ghoul. Oh, the Mad Ghoul, the Invisible Man, Mummy, the Mad Ghoul, and what they called like other assorted monsters. And that movie was abandoned, and eventually all that kind of became House of Frankenstein. And so I don't know what that could have been, and maybe this was a film that was originally slated to be another franchise that they hoped to have. They hoped to have another franchise of a Dracula, a Frankenstein, a Invisible Man, a Mummy, where all of these films had some type of sequel. The Edgar Allan Poe movies were kind of on their own. They were Edgar Allan Poe movies, so they made multiple ones. But I think that they kind of had hoped to do something with this. Hollywood Reporter announced it. But yeah, it was something that I found really interesting in my research with this. Again, and that's a really cool all-star lineup. If you have Lugosi, Karloff, Chaney, and Peter Lorre, and Claude Rains, and George Zucco. George Zucco was in the Mad Ghoul, so I don't know. Maybe he would have played his character in that, but he was in a Mummy film. He was in a little bit of everything. So
he always played a good heel or creep.
In
a film. One of those guys who, if he wasn't the villain at the start of the film, you could be pretty sure he would be by the time it was over.
The biggest compliment anybody ever paid to me, I was at work, and I work with a guy who's a big silent movie fan, and he's a classic cinema fan, not necessarily horror films. And he subscribes to some classic movie newspaper. It was newspaper print. And he threw the paper on my desk one day and said, "You look like a big George Zucco fan." And I went, "Well, yes, I am." So, I don't know, the cover story was about George Zucco. It's the only newspaper in the world with a George Zucco headline.
So merely by looking at your face and or attire. Were you wearing a George Zucco t-shirt?
I was wearing my George Zucco fan club pin.
You look like a Denny Terrio fan. Sorry, contractually have to mention him every once in a while. I get $7 for that. So at the spur of the moment, favorite Universal monster film or creature?
Well, as much as I am a Bela Lugosi fan, The Creature from the Black Lagoon, and again, Revenge of the Creature, I think is one of the coolest films. I love his terror of that marine land. I absolutely love that.
He busts into like the clam shack or whatever that restaurant.
Yes, he pushes over the cutout of himself.
Yes,
which I always thought was really cool
in 3D.
In 3D, which again is really cool. I could really watch that one all the time. So I would have to go with Revenge of the Creature, and definitely in second place, in a very close second, I would have to go probably Ghosts of Frankenstein, because I really do love Bela Lugosi as Igor.
He is really good in that film. It's easy to
Yeah.
think of him as a caricature, but he's legit really good as that character.
And he made the caricature.
It's easy to just dismiss him as the blah, blah, but no. Jeff, do you have a favorite Universal monster or monster film?
I kind of do, and it's the original Frankenstein, 1931, and that's because my dad introduced me to that. I saw it when I was really little, and it was almost over my head. I was so little, but then I watched it again and again over the years, and I just remember my dad introducing me to that film, and I don't know, it just stuck with me. It just stuck with me. I would also say that that's the one I've seen most often, too.
I don't know if I've talked about this on the podcast before, but when we first ran that, we ran Dracula followed by Frankenstein. And JT was sitting in the car with me. We watched them both in a row. And it was shocking to see the filmmaking difference between those two movies. Dracula feels very stage bound and very of its time. And Frankenstein feels so much more contemporary in how it's shot and how it's cut and how the acting is. It was really shocking to realize those were both released the same year from the same studio.
I agree. They're quite different. Yeah.
Yeah. Dracula definitely was, it was built from the stage show.
Right.
And that's actually both those films, both that double feature is why we had Universal horror films beyond 1936. They had success with Dracula. They had success with Frankenstein, Invisible Man, Bride of Frankenstein. Then Daughter of Frankenstein came around, and, didn't do well, and the studio kind of said, "Yeah, okay, like we had a good run," and some of the Edgar Allan Poe features, again, they kind of said, "Well, we had a good run. We're going to focus on westerns and musicals and things like that." And so then in 1938, theaters started showing this double feature. There was a double feature released of Dracula and Frankenstein. And occasionally, again, something in my research that I thought was kind of unusual, occasionally it would be Dracula, Frankenstein, and Son of Kong, which I don't get the connection. And it's an RKO and Universal, but and that's what really jump started it again. Universal saw this uptick in interest in horror movies again, even though they weren't gone very long, probably a year, but people were flocking to midnight shows of this, and so they were re-released as like a double feature horror, and revised the Frankenstein franchise. Universal quickly announced, "We're making Son of Frankenstein," brought back Boris Karloff, and then the horror movie machine kicked into high gear once again, kicking them out. So we have that exact double feature is certainly what we have to thank. We have that double feature to thank for horror movies after Daughter of Dracula.
Do you know when the real art re-releases were? Because I know for the longest time when you saw Universal Monster film trailers, like on a DVD or something, at the bottom it always said a real art re-release.
I don't. There must have been 40s or 50s.
Okay, yeah, I just found this. Frankenstein Real Art re-release title card 1951.
I think, and again, back to kind of those the books that we talked about and things like that. For me, it may have been a little late, because I think our public television and things like that showed really the bottom of the barrel when it came to horror movies that I grew up watching. It was the worst public domain films that they could show. So when I finally saw those Universal films, I think that just opened up a whole new world to me. I was like, wow, like all horror movies aren't bad.
Oh, absolutely. When you watch these now, it was a studio picture, and that used to mean something. There was a level of quality from top to bottom in craftsmanship and acting and lighting and sets, and they're really gorgeous to look at. And even the cheaper ones are still they don't play like the Killer Shrews. Not that there's anything wrong with the Killer Shrews. I'm just saying they're
definitely, like I said, the public domain films that again I typically grew up watching and recording and staying up late for were Killer Shrews, were Revolt of the Zombies. I remember Revolt of the Zombies being on constantly. Some Ed Wood films, which again were certainly an obsession of mine. So Bride of the Monster, Revenge of the Dead, Plan 9, they would kind of show these bottom of the barrel films, and again you would see these Universal, and you kind of got that like, wow, these are not bottom of the barrel films. Yeah, like you said, they're studio films.
But think of the inspiration that all those Ed Wood movies gave to children. They look at that and say, I could do that.
Honestly, my friends and I, when we were in high school, we came across the Ray Dennis Steckler movies on videotape when they first came out. The Incredibly Strange Creatures Who Stopped Living and Became Mixed Up Zombies, and the Thrill Killers, and Rat Finka Boo Boo, and things that a lot of people still haven't heard of. But they were like these movies done on a shoestring, and it literally, to us who we were in high school and we had access to a camcorder, we started shooting little backyard movies because we were like, this is possible to do this. Most of us went on to go to film school and never make a movie, but still it was an inspiration where it's like, wow, this guy did this with his friends and not a lot of resources, and 30 years later they're getting released on videotape, which at the time was the home video format. And you can say what you want about the Ed Wood movies, they're entertaining, and we're still talking about them, and people are still making money from them. It's a shame that he never did, but the incredibly,
I owe a lot to the Incredibly Strange Creatures who stopped living to become mixed up zombies. As the story goes, the day that I was supposed to be born, my mom watched it on television.
Oh, that's amazing!
And so there has to be something there that got into my brain somehow. It stuck with me all these years.
I looked it up once in the microfilm at my local library as a kid. The movie that was playing at one of the theaters in my hometown the day I was born was Dirty Mary, Crazy Larry. A drive-in car movie. And if you know what I like, drive-in car movies is pretty high up there. So it is kind of cosmically funny that was what was playing when I screamed for the first time.
Wow.
We'd like to thank you for joining us, Thom. If anybody wants,
thank you. No, this
always
is
a pleasure.
Always a pleasure.
An excuse to talk about movies with you and pop culture.
Yeah,
I can't wait. We talked once before, as I said, about Primetime 66, 1967. That book is available now on Amazon, and I also see you can buy now, receive later, James Bond and the 60s Spy Craze. I can't wait. Hopefully, this will be out. Well, yeah, it's coming out. It looks to be coming out in April of 2024. So
March, April, yeah.
Should we have another James Bond night, we have to have you there because, you have to have the expert on the scene.
I would love a James Bond night, and I would love some of these 60s spy spoofs that came out.
There were so many.
There were so many spy spoofs that came out during that time. And as I talk about in the book, in 1964, the spy spoofs are really hot, and critics are like tripping over each other to compliment them and say, oh, these are so cool. By 67,
enough.
Every critic is saying, get these out of here. So
you mean like Matt Helm?
Yep.
Yeah.
Talk about Matt Helm, all of those films. So yeah, the first Matt Helm film, oh cool. And then the last one, we're done.
We'll absolutely have you back on to talk about the book when it comes out, because that's
awesome.
Again, something I've had a deep and abiding love for half my life. So we hope you all will join us at Universal Monster Mash 7 on October 27th and 28th at the Mahoning Drive-In Theater. To get tickets, you can get them now. It's mahoningdit.com. That'll get you there. And follow us online. Call us up. We now have a movie phone type phone number. It's 484-613-1314. You'll hear showtimes for the week, sign up for our email newsletter. We got a million ways to fill your head with what's going on at the Mahoning. And this is the time when Virgil usually says, Jeff, take it away, my friend. But I'm not Virgil, and that's his catchphrase. So, Jeff, do your thing.
Ladies and gentlemen, thanks again for coming out tonight to the Mahoning Drive-In Theater. We hope you'll come back and see us again real soon. The exit is on the right-hand side of the screen at the front of the field, and most importantly, have a very safe trip home. Good night, and God bless you.